Hello everybody, Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata, and today I'm going to talk about shock tower braces. What they do, how you can tell a good one from a bad one, do you really need one, why is it not called a strut tower brace, all that kind of good stuff. Before we get started, if you do like the kind of content we're doing, if you do enjoy lots of Miata content, technical content, good information, be sure to like our channel, to subscribe to our channel. You'll find out when we're shooting these videos, when we're going live with them. And it helps us. The more people that subscribe, the more we get some spread, more people can find out about this good information, everybody wins. Also, when you're watching this video today, if you have questions, please put them in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them either in the live chat, or I'll answer them on camera, or if you're watching this in the future, hello future, please put your questions in the comments and we will answer them in the comments there. All right, shock tower braces. Flyin Miata has been selling a shock tower brace of some sort for decades. We first got our first one, I remember installing one in 1996, so I know we had them at least that long ago. The designs have changed and evolved over the years, but this is the latest iteration. It is available now. They are in stock on our website right now. If you're watching in the future, I can't guarantee that, but we will do our best. And I'm going to tell you about why you might need one, how they work, and how to choose the right one. So, these are commonly called, I've trained myself not to say this so badly, strut tower braces, because on a strut-based car, the top of the shock is a structural part of the suspension in terms of it's part of the geometry of the suspension. When you're turning, when you're braking, the top of the shock is being, or the top of the strut is being yanked forward and back and side to side. And especially on hatchbacks, there's not a lot of material around, especially in the rears, around the top of those shock towers. And so they're very flexible, they move around. And so what you often see is on high performance cars with struts is you'll see a strut tower brace because they're getting suspension geometry changes as those shock tops move around. It's very important. You know, so if you're running something with a big open cargo bay, like my little CRX, for example, those poor struts are going all over the place. And a brace across there might be a little hard on cargo capacity, but it has a big effect on the handling. Now the Miata is a double wishbone suspension. All Miatas are double wishbone or multi-link suspension, but effectively the shock is only there to support the car. It doesn't determine suspension geometry. I've talked about this in the past, struts versus shocks. We've got a video on our channel you can check out. But effectively what it means is that the top of the shock is not involved in braking events, it's not involved in cornering events, but it is involved in holding the car up. And that means that all the vertical loads, I'll have a look at the car here, all the vertical loads coming through the wheel are going through this shock top. So this tower, which is hidden behind a filter here, this tower is getting a lot of vertical loads, mostly up of course, but also some down. If you hit a corner, if you hit a bump on one corner, that one side will try to go up. If you hit a bump on both wheels, they'll both try to go up. And it looks like there's a lot of structure here, but there isn't, because Mazda put an engine in the middle of that. So this is a big hollow opening. And whenever you're looking for structural rigidity, for strength, you want to close the box. You want to make sure that you don't have just a three-sided thing that can move around. If you add another bar across the top, you close the box, literally, it makes it much stiffer. So in the Miata, it's got these two, we'll call them frame horns, coming out the front, one on each side, and then there's a bar across the front here that is underappreciated for its effectiveness. That basically, most people think it's just a bumper support, but there's a bar across the front that actually is quite structural, and it prevents the two front frame horns from twisting, from moving relative to each other. But we can help even more by adding this bar across the top. You might think, well, it's a lot of steel, it's not, how much can it really matter? You can actually see, if you take a car, especially an early NA that has very few braces on it, if you take a car and you lift it up and you measure the distance between those towers, it'll actually grow just from the weight of the car drooping down on it. And then, you know, as you put the car on it, 1G worth of load, if you want to call it that, you'll see them move closer together. And then, of course, when you're driving down the road, you know, we often design for, say, 3 Gs of impact on a wheel. You can imagine that poor thing is going all over the place. So that's why strut braces, or shock tower braces in the Miata's case, are quite important even on our application. Now, if you're an autocrosser and everything that matters is that ½ ounce of weight, you know, because you're accelerating from a slow speed as much as possible, autocrossers generally value lightweight over chassis rigidity. But other than that edge case, when you're on the track and you're putting serious loads through the suspension, especially if you're jumping curbs, you're bouncing off stuff, coming down the corkscrew at Laguna Seca, the last thing you want is the front of your car to go "Whoa," like this every time you hit a bump, because it affects things like the way your steering functions. I mean, you are moving your actual subframe around a little bit when you do that. It also improves ride quality because it isolates the suspension from the chassis and allows the suspension to take care of absorbing the bumps, which is exactly what it's for, and not the chassis acting like a big undamped wet noodle. If you want to know more about overall chassis rigidity, how it works, what happens, where it is, I did another whole video on that. Check out our channel. There's a whole video on chassis stiffness. At the time, we didn't have any shock tower braces to show off. I did talk about them quite a bit, but now's our chance to talk about the actual Flyin Miata one. So basically just think of those shock mounts, instead of trying to go forward and back and side to side like they might in a Strut car, they're going up and down, which they're also doing in a Strut car, but on a Miata specifically. So why would we want to choose one particular shock tower brace over another? Because there's a bunch of them out there. You can buy inexpensive shock tower braces all over the place. Well, it has to do with them doing their job properly. What they're trying to do, this doesn't quite fit on here, is prevent both the shock tower, the shock tops from going up and down relative to each other, and also from moving in and out as the whole car sort of flexes and deflexes. We call it that, flexes and extends perhaps. So here's an example of an inexpensive shock tower brace. This is literally the towel rack out of our shop bathroom, but it is a brand. We have covered the name to protect the innocent, but this is fairly typical of a shock tower brace you might buy off a popular auction site, for example. It looks cool. It fits fairly well. You know, it's got a little hump to go over the engine. It bolts on, obviously, on the actual shock tops. What's not to like, right? Well, let's look at the design features. Well, for one thing, it's got pivot points right here. So if you're trying to keep one corner from going up and down, the bolts are loose. It doesn't have any natural strength. There's nothing there to, the bolts are almost designed to be pivots. So it has very little effectiveness like this. Obviously a problem. The other problem is this top bar. It looks great, doesn't it? It looks like an I-beam, nice and wide, but the problem is that makes it strong in this direction. And there's no forces that are forcing the top of the bar back. All the forces on it are, there we go, are basically pushing side to side. And you can see this thing flexes like a ski or a hockey stick, depending on where you're. They're all going to be winter analogies. We'll stick with that. Maybe a golf club? I don't know. I don't flex golf clubs. But it fails both at being strong in this direction and it fails at being strong in this direction. So this is a great place to lean on when you're working on your engine. You can hang your rags on it, but really it's just there. It's just a bit of added weight. So let's compare that to the Flyin Miata design. Stay. Flyin Miata design, you can see we have two bolts in here, so there's not possible for the towers to pivot relative to the bar. The bar itself, the towers are taller, the bar itself is flatter, so it doesn't have that same, let's see if I can get them side by side here. It doesn't have the big bend in the bar, which makes it stiffer fundamentally. The bar itself is a larger diameter, and it's made of stainless steel instead of aluminum in this case, so it is a stronger material and it is shaped better. I'm not going to try the ski test or the hockey stick flex test on this one because I'm going to hurt myself. I've done it before. You can't flex this. It's just not going to happen. So that's a significant difference in the design on the FM1. It also says Flyin Miata in laser engraved logo on the front. I mean, what would you rather have up there? Flyin Miata or, yes, best Chinese racing development core. There's a couple of other things on this that you might not notice when you first look at it. We spent a lot of time on designing the towers to be compatible with the stock airbox. That was something we considered to be a requirement. So the stock airbox for the NA Miatas sits right about here, actually right about here from your viewpoint, and gets in the way. So this is designed to go around that. If you have cruise control, the cruise control actuator sits right about here, and the cable has to come this way. So this hole is actually there to be a window, to be a pass-through for the cable for cruise control to make sure that fits well. We could have made that straight to make it a little bit stronger at the end, lighter really, but we needed that hole so the cruise control worked properly. It also fits with the Canadian water bottles. If you have a Canadian spec car, you know what I'm talking about. They have a ginormous windshield washer bottle sitting over here. It will make contact slightly, but that's because the bottle sits right there. But we've tested all of those. It works. It fits with LS engines, so it will fit over your V8 conversion. It will not fit over a K-Series because K-Series are very tall engines and there's just not that much room left between the K-Series and the hood to get this through. So I'm unfortunately, Honda swap guys, this will not work with your car. Also, it is compatible, this is a question that we got, is it compatible with our master cylinder brace? We did a video a while back on the master cylinder brace. It's hard to see in here because someone put a turbo in this car, but there's this brace here that actually prevents the master cylinder from moving when the firewall flexes. And this shock tower brace is designed to be compatible with that. As you can see, we have it on this car as well as a slightly earlier prototype version of the brace. The only difference between this version and that one is the tower design is a little bit different. This was before we added the compatibility for the stock airbox for the NA. So one question we got is, how do these compare to the factory ones? Because Mazda put a shock tower brace on the NB on certain cars starting in 1999, and then they redesigned it in 2001 for the sport model cars. The 1999 model, 1990-2000, is okay. It's got the same problem as our eBay bar over here. It's got the single pivot hinge problem with that. The second one that Mazda built for the 2001 and later cars is actually quite a nice design. It's got 2 vertical bolts on it. It's designed so it cannot twist at the towers. It's steel, a little bit heavier. But it is actually a pretty good design. I would not bother taking off a factory 2001 to later to put this one on, but not all that many of those cars got those, so chances are you're going to be looking at something better. So I would take off the brace. This is an improvement on the 99-2000 bar. I would call it very similar to the 2001 and later, although it's modified a little bit differently. And hey, it's stainless steel with the Flyin Miata logo on it. Was not the love. Now, how will you feel one of these in the car? Often a common question. Interestingly, it often shows up as improved steering feel. And I think that's because when you turn the wheel, you're putting a lot of load on one corner, you're taking load off the other, and the whole car tries to go like this. And it prevents that, it fights against it. Again, allows the suspension to move suspension stuff and spends less time torquing the chassis over. So you actually get improved steering feel out of one of these. And the ride quality will improve a little bit more as well because your suspension is attached to a more solid foundation, so you will get that improvement in ride quality. I don't want to necessarily claim you will improve your lap times. Maybe at the very, very bleeding edge, if you're right on the edge, the extra bit of chassis flex in there from big sticky tires, I can see how it could possibly help. But mostly this is for comfort and response, less so about outright speed. I think that's reasonable. We all drive our cars on the streets, right? Do we have any questions going on over here? Mike? Why don't we triangulate? That's a good question. There are a lot of popular bars that go back to here. They attach to the firewall. And unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, we have put this nice little beauty cover on here, but you'll discover that this is a single sheet of very, very thin steel that's almost flexible enough to bend. You can almost bend it by hand. So there's really no benefit to attaching to this firewall because it's just not structural. Also, there's no fore-aft loads on these shock tops. We're not trying to keep them from moving forward under braking, for example, or dealing with steering. So there really is no need to brace them fore-aft. So a triangular one looks cool, but if you have room to get a bar over the top of the engine, this is the strongest way to do it that uses the least amount of material. So that is why we don't do a triangular one. One question we also got, I've got an ND over here. And see, this is NC. I have an ND over there as well, but we'll look at the NC. Is why don't we have a shock tower brace for the NCs and the NDs? And the reason is because Mazda did a pretty good job on it. And they did that by designing from the start to have factory bracing on here. They can't go over the top of the engine because there's just not enough room to get a bar between the engine top and the bottom of the hood. That's simply a packaging problem. You can't really go straight across. In this particular case, it would cause problems with a turbocharger. Not a factory option, but Mazda did what the best they could. They drove it back here, and it went into hard points that are attached not to the floppy little, listen to that thing, listen how hollow that is, not to the weak little firewall, but to the actual structure down below it, more or less into the transmission tunnel. So this was designed in from the factory to be as strong as possible. I think it could be stronger if it went straight across, but packaging says you can't, so this is what the factory does. The reason we haven't done an aftermarket version of this, because honestly, we could make it shinier, and that's about all we could do. The factory option is pretty good. On the ND, you do have to buy, I think to retrofit one, you have to buy a plate that goes in here. Can be retrofitted. It's a little more involved, but you need to have that structure there to triangulate into. And again, this is the only place you can actually do it. There's just not enough room to go over top. So that's why we don't offer one for the NCs and the NDs. These are also stiffer cars from the factory. The early cars are the noodliest of all Miatas. Yes, there we go. You can see, you can't really see the structure too well in here, but there is a plate that's been put back in there. And you can see this is the beginning of the structure here, this seam. Beginning of the structure right here, so the actual little floppy firewall section is quite short on the ND. And again, this was designed much later. Now, this car came out in 2016. The NA came out in 1989 originally. And so it used much less sophisticated tools to design the chassis. It is much less stiff to start with. So that's one reason why, they need it much more. Yeah, it's a great addition for a street, fast road car where you value the steering feel, where you value the ride quality. Looks great. That doesn't hurt. Our previous ones were black powder coat. They didn't look as good, so this is kind of a nice little upgrade in that regard. Anyhow, if you have more questions, throw them in the comments. And in the meantime, we will be doing more videos like this every week. We'll be reporting live from the Gap in a couple of weeks, I'm sure, if we can manage to get internet access out there in the sticks. We will be coming back to you next week with more technical stuff, more product information, whatever you want to see. If there's something you do want to see, throw it in the comments. We'll respond to that. If it's a great idea, we'd love to do a video on it because we want to do things you want to watch. In the meantime, my name's Keith Tanner. Thanks for your attention. We'll see you again soon.